Alright, the Sega Saturn most graphically impressive games list, done. So considering the 32-bit era is my era, why not do a PlayStation 1 too? Well, I did, and here it is. The most graphically impressive PlayStation 1 games of all time. And remember, like always, this list is just someone's opinion, yours might differ, that's cool. All the footage for these games is real footage coming out of a PlayStation 3, not emulated or smooth garbage that doesn't actually represent what the games look like when they first came out. And I've actually had that compliment on some of my old videos that I actually take real footage rather than emulated footage, because again, it tricks people into thinking the games look different than they actually look. And I already have a list for games for a part 2. Some games I couldn't get footage of in this episode because PlayStation 3 has issues with some games, such as Tobal 2 and Tekken 3. There's an issue with the sort of interlaced video signal those two games send out. So for the second episode, obviously I'm going to try to get footage in some way, but it's not going to be through my PlayStation 3. But let me know in the comments down below if there's any games you recommend that aren't on the list that are just visually amazing on the PlayStation. So let's start out with a game that's near and dear to my heart, being that I love the Panzer Dragoon series, my favorite series of all time. It's not quite exactly the same, but it's the same general genre, a little bit similar. And it's called Omega Boost. Omega Boost was developed by Polyphony Digital and Cyberhead. Polyphony, famous for Gran Turismo, of course, which was released in 1999 in Japan and later that year worldwide. It's still their only non-racing game ever released, and its ties are even closer to Panzer Dragoon than you might think, because the main programmer for Omega Boost was actually Yuji Yasuhara, who also programmed Panzer Dragoon Zwei. Surprise, surprise. So obviously the company that made the groundbreaking visuals of Gran Turismo are graphical wizards, and Omega Boost blew me away when I saw it. It's almost overload, because everything that the PlayStation could do graphically are in Omega Boost. The super unique particle effects, really silky smooth frame rate, great texture work, transparencies everywhere, amazing lighting. Almost every frame of the game, all the effects are like literally in pure swing. It's pure eye candy that never ends. It's like a firework made of Skittles exploding in your brain. And the best part is the frame rate never slows down at a solid 30 frames per second. Yes, it's only 30. It almost looks so good that it's 60, but there actually is a secret level in the game where it is actually 60 frames per second, which is super impressive for the PlayStation at the time, for sure. It's pretty amazing what Omega Boost does at times, and it really is a showcase for what the PlayStation could do, even if it was later on in the PlayStation's lifespan, where obviously graphical teams, graphical artists were much better.
Activating Viper Boost.
Alright, Alien Trilogy was the original classic Alien FPS in the 32-bit console era, but Alien Resurrection was night and day better looking in the graphical department. Maybe not in the atmosphere department, that's debatable, but graphically, this game is amazing. It's a powerhouse. It's an absolute visual gem that was released later on in the PlayStation's lifespan, again, in 2000 by Argonaut Games. So unlike Alien Trilogy, which used 3D, environments and 2D sprites for all the characters and enemies and stuff on the screen, Alien Resurrection was pretty amazing because Alien Resurrection was full 3D in every aspect. Fully 3D enemies, including some really good looking xenomorphs, and really good texture work and lighting to set the mood. The control scheme was pretty revolutionary at the time too, using the dual sticks and everything. But this video is solely about graphics, so let's just stay on graphically impressive games. There's some really great graphics like dripping water, fog, obviously, you know, sparks and effects everywhere. But it's not perfect. It does suffer from everyone's favorite PlayStation main graphical weakness, which is the texture warping, right? It's pretty evident when you know, at times on the walls and at times on the floor, especially when you duck down under things. You can definitely see it. But other than that, honestly, the game looks stunning. Like all the textures and the lighting really sets the mood in sort of an alien type game and really helps sell the fear aspect of it. The game is super hard if you're gonna play it, but dang, it's graphically impressive.
Will all non-essential personnel please report to lifeboats?
The series that Capcom forgot. Alright, Mr. DNA, take Resident Evil and blend it up with dinosaurs. But the reason it's on the list, the reason it's so graphically impressive is that this is one of the first games, survival horror games that Capcom did, where the backgrounds weren't pre-rendered but fully 3D. So Dino Crisis was Capcom's first game they did this in, until Resident Evil Code Veronica on the Dreamcast. It's super weird that Dino Crisis 2, the sequel that was released later than this, obviously, on the exact same system actually went back to 2D backgrounds. So this one, to me, looks a lot better than the second, which is why the first is on the list, second's not on the list. The 3D environments actually let the game do some really cool things that Resident Evil couldn't do, such as sweeping camera shots, and that really sort of set the mood and showcase the game's great lighting effects and the really good enemy models too. That's easily the best part of the graphics engine to me. The graphics really help the atmosphere of the game because of how they did them. They really elevate the game in my nostalgia brain, because the 3D environments let the world feel a little more connected, a little more lived in, and it really worked to sell the game, the visuals in the game. The environments aren't as detailed as pre-rendered backgrounds, of course, but it's got decent texture work, lighting, and like I said before, the camera work in the context of the 3D environments easily make Dino Crisis one of the best looking PlayStation 1 games. It's pretty funny that a system that really is a weak 2D platform, and whose American side of the company at the time was completely against releasing 2D games when the system first released, but it really gave us one of the greatest, most beautiful pixel art 2D games of all time. That is, of course, Castlevania Symphony of the Night.
We will meet again.
Now, this is one of the greatest games on the system, but it's also one of the best looking. And what a stunning, stunning game, fusing the perfect mix of 2D sprites with 3D background elements, with just some of the best sprite work you'll ever see in your life. Castlevania Symphony of the Night is a massive game, and just the variety and the pure amount of sprite work done in the game is crazy. And Konami at the time was easily one of the best in the business. How it has fallen since then. So many different enemies, so much amazing artistry in the sprite work, with a lot of the sprites having unique graphical sort of effects. There's transparency everywhere. There's non-stop rotating and scaling on a lot of the sprites, especially some of the amazing boss encounters. All of it runs super smooth. There's not much slowdown. There's definitely some at certain points, which is pretty common in the PlayStation with 2D games back in the day, but it is pretty rare in the game. Literally, Castlevania Symphony of the Night is one of the best looking 2D games ever. And this version looks even better, believe it or not, than the 2D powerhouse that was the Sega Saturn version. Due to that being a really poor port, a really lazy port at the end of the Saturn's lifespan. And again, it's easily one of the best looking games on the PlayStation. The 2D art and just the variety of everything in the game is amazing. Terracon is a rare UK only game by Picture House that did some amazing stuff, like literally amazing stuff, and not many people know about this, mostly because it was a UK only release. Never came to America, never even came to Japan, UK only. At the time, it was supposed to be released in the US by Midway, but it never happened for whatever reason. It was one of the first PlayStation games that I ever saw that had super detailed character animations, especially up close during the cutscenes. It reminds me a lot of the Time Splitters animation style, which obviously were games way later on the PlayStation 2, a much more powerful system. Well, character animations in that style were right here on Terracon on the PlayStation 1. And I'm sorry my footage for this game is boring, because the game keeps crashing on me. I'm not sure if it has issues playing on the PS3, which is what I'm playing it on, but it is what it is. But back to the graphics. Terracon is an absolute showcase for anything the PlayStation 1 could do. If it could do it, it's there. Everything. Transparencies. The graphic effects are really, really nice. Super smooth. There's a lot of perspective warping in it, with like a fisheye lens and stuff. It runs really, really well, and it does it all in these giant, semi-open, fully 3D areas, which again, for the time of the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn, the 32-bit era, that was a huge jump up from the last generation. And that's really the biggest praise I can give Terracon. It looks so good, it doesn't even look like a PlayStation 1 game. It almost looks like you could be playing a PlayStation 2 game on PlayStation 1. The levels are huge, and the most impressive thing about them is the draw distance. You can literally see so far into the distance. It's really, really impressive for the PlayStation 1. Obviously, there's a little bit of pop-up in the distance, but most of the land geometry is there, and they achieved that amazing technical feat, in part by partially removing the textures in the distance to help the game run smoothly and, you know, programming magic, which gave it a really cool, really unique graphical flair. There's even a day and night cycle to the levels that looks brilliant too. Have you heard of Terracon before? Since it's such a lesser known game, let me know down below. Alright, let's start with the threes. And let me be clear about something, alright? The PlayStation had a much longer lifespan than the Sega Saturn. That point cannot be disputed. So a lot of the development teams that worked on multiple PlayStation games had a lot more time to learn the exact intricacies of the system. So of course, most of the best looking games are later on in the lifespan, so there's a lot of threes on a list like this. So let's start with Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped by Naughty Dog. Arguably the best looking platformer on the system. However, I might add, it is not my favorite. I like Crash 2 better than 3. And I even think Crash as an entire series is actually really overrated. All of them have terrible controls, and there's a pretty questionable level design in some of them. But that doesn't mean it doesn't look good. And Crash 3 really does just that. A lot of the Crash series charm is the style of the graphics, how colorful they are, and the tropical environments are the best part to me. Animations and enemy models are nothing really to write home about, but the environments, even though they're very limited in scope, obviously for performance reasons, are bright, colorful, beautifully smooth, and are just a wonder. They're beautiful to look at. The texture work in the game is probably the best in the series too. Not that part 1 and 2 look bad, but this is definitely the pinnacle of the series. Lighting and graphical effects are all on full display here, like many other games on this list, especially the underwater levels. I love the effects of the spherical levels from the level select hub. And there are even some amazing, for the PlayStation era at least, reflections through some levels which are really well done. On Crash 3, Naughty Dog really squeezed everything they could from the PlayStation hardware, and you could definitely tell. Spyro, Year of the Dragon, or Spyro 3, is another 3 in the list for the same reason. But remember, as you'll see in a minute, that it's not just the 3s that automatically look best in the series. Foreshadowing. But Spyro 3 is definitely one of the graphical high marks of the original PlayStation, for sure. It has all the colorful and highly detailed environments that Crash 3 had, but the levels were so much more involved, they were so much bigger, they were so much more impressive than the Crash levels. While the Crash 3 levels looked great, they were also super cramped, obviously for performance reasons like I said before, but the wizards at Insomniac Games, yes, that Insomniac, made truly what might be the best looking platformer on the PlayStation with huge, highly detailed environments without hardly any performance drops or pop-in. The frame rate is one of the most impressive things about Spyro 3, and the really smooth garage shaded polygons everywhere, even when all the sort of nice graphical effects like Spyro himself, his flame breath or lightning, and water and smoke effects, barrels and pots that break apart in sort of real time, the large semi-open levels and giant bosses, it stays pretty steady throughout the game, and I've never seen the frame rate suffer for anything that's going on stream like at all. The enemies and the characters are much more fluidly animated than Crash 3 and really add to the visuals in the levels. They really mix well. It really is a beautiful all-encompassing package of what the PlayStation could do. There is really honestly a lot of stuff graphically going on in Spyro 3 at all times, and it's super impressive to me that they could keep the frame rate and speed of the action as fluid and solid as it is. It's definitely one of the best on the PlayStation. Wipeout XL is one of my favorite racing games of all time, period, end of story, but it doesn't just play good, it looks good too. And it's the first series today on the list that bucks the sort of 3 is the best looking trend, because there was a Wipeout 3 on the PlayStation. And it was a huge, in my opinion, huge step back from XL. It came out in 1996, developed by one of my favorite PlayStation developers, Psygnosis. And it was known as XL in America and Japan, while in the UK it was known as Wipeout 2097. And it had a slightly different soundtrack. XL was mind-blowing to me with the fidelity of the graphics, along with the pure sense of speed it gave you. Couple that with the amazing art direction and graphic design, which does count in the overall graphically impressive package to me. Remember, my list. In addition to the really nice texture work on the tracks and the ships, the game has some great graphical weapon effects, and a couple really high points, especially like things like the Quake Disruptor. It's a weapon that you actually shoot forward, and it actually in real time morphs the track ahead of you, like a wave is going through the ground. And it was one of the first times I had ever seen an effect like that, and it was like, whoa, holy smokes. And better yet, even with such high graphical fidelity and amazing effects, it runs so fast, especially on higher difficulties, like blisteringly fast, like almost F-Zero fast, but no loss in graphical quality. Like as you go up on the classes, the races get faster and faster, and it runs smooth as butter the whole time. And now, like I said before, I think XL looks better than the third installment of the series, Wipeout 3, released 3 years later in 1999. But man, was that a huge step backwards in all aspects, including the art and graphical elements. The weapon effects are all worse, the levels are a lot less colorful, and they're very muddy looking, and the menu system, oh, the menu system. It's so boring. It's so boring. It looks like it was done in Microsoft Paint by someone who doesn't know that colors exist in the world. The fidelity of the graphics is a little sharper, but the presentation and the graphical effects really look so much better in XL. That's why XL is on the list over 3. And that brings me to another 2 that is better than a 3, Colony Wars Vengeance, by Psygnosis again. I'm telling you, Psygnosis was like my spirit animal in the early PlayStation games. I loved all their games. Wipeout, Destruction Derby, G-Police, and especially Colony Wars. The first Colony Wars blew me away. But 2 is on this list. This is part 2, Vengeance. The first Colony Wars, I was instantly impressed with the amazing visual style and the freedom and sense of flight that it gave you. But the second game, Colony Wars Vengeance, which we're talking about now, really was the high mark graphically, with amazingly beautiful spacescapes and ship models and visual effects, with a silky smooth frame rate, the whole package. After Wipeout XL and Colony Wars Vengeance, Psygnosis really proved that they were one of the top Sony development teams on the PlayStation in the graphical departments, like no doubt about it. The scale of the missions and the environments is pretty breathtaking. And all of the weapon and volumetric effects are very colorful. The graphics use a lot of like neons and bright colors with the amazing lighting effects. Part 3 of Colony Wars was called Red Sun, and just like Wipeout 3, it was another step backwards. And the biggest sin of that is probably a choppy frame rate. It went to some really uninspired art direction, and the bland environments were really had some really bad 2D assets on some levels, like the planets in the background, which looked amazing in Vengeance. In Red Sun, it literally looks like a 2D like sticker someone put on your TV. It does not look real. It does not immerse you at all. Like, I don't know. It's a huge step back. Almost the same downfalls as Wipeout 3, which is why Vengeance is on the list and not Red Sun. Overall, it's a great series overall, though. Now, did you really think I would do a graphic list without mentioning Gran Turismo 2? Come on. Sega was the king of the arcade racer at the time, obviously. I'm an arcade racing fan, much more than a super realistic, hyper-realistic racing fan myself. But that's the direction Sony went in. Hyper-realism. In its flagship racing game, Gran Turismo 2, made by Polyphony Digital, same people for Omega Boost, created a racing series with graphics that had never been matched before on a console system. Gran Turismo was no graphical slouch, but obviously, and they look pretty similar, honestly. Gran Turismo 1 and 2 look almost the same. But Gran Turismo 2 is where they perfected their craft graphically, and it's an amazing sight to see, even if it only is marginally better than GT1. Remember, when the game first came out, like, the replays were the big thing. Like, you could squint your eyes and watch a replay, and it almost looked like you're watching a real television broadcast. The car models, of which they're like, 400 or something insane like that, are super detailed and modeled with fake reflections sort of on the windows, but the way they did it, it was definitely a good graphical effect and really sells the realism of the graphics, even though it's not real reflections. The tracks are just as detailed, real-world tracks with massive features like giant mountains, realistic billboards, minimal pop-up, but it's no Daytona USA, okay? The game really shines with the frame rate and car models and, just complete detail over every graphical aspect. And all that graphical fidelity and all the cool things with the environments and stuff did not hurt the frame rate. And I've never seen any slowdown in the game or stutters or anything like that. So Gran Turismo 2 is an amazing graphical achievement for the PlayStation. Everyone knows this. That's why I had to include it on the list. Vagrant Story, the vastly overrated RPG that, in my opinion, is not fun at all. Not fun at all. Not one measly iota of fun is in this game. Like, I think you need a PhD in biochemistry to understand all the systems in the game to just do like one damage to an enemy. But, it's on this list because it looks so dang gorgeous. So never mind about the gameplay. Released later in the lifespan of the PlayStation 1 in the year of 2000, and developed by Squaresoft, Vagrant Story is easily one of the best looking games on the system, as much as I hate the gameplay. It had a very interesting art style that definitely differed from a lot of other games Squaresoft was releasing at the time, with a sort of hyper focus on the character models and the dark, brooding, muddy sort of environments in the game. But the character models, they're just something else. They're really angular and stylized, but super detailed at the same time. Like, the style of the game is definitely, it's unmatched. Especially with the faces that actually animate mouth movements in, the cinemas and the cutscenes. The character and enemy animations is an absolute showcase of what talented developers could do with the PlayStation hardware. And couple that with the cinematic camera movement, it gave the game such a realistic sort of cinematic look that really only Metal Gear Solid had captured beforehand. It's like the RPG equivalent of Metal Gear Solid. You just need your graphing calculator to use a potion. The environments have really good texture work, even though they're pretty limited in scale. They're very blocky too. But this was like a real next-gen role-playing game, and one of the first steps away from pre-rendered backgrounds to full 3D environments from Squaresoft. The style and the graphics of the game are just, they way surpass the gameplay of the game. It's definitely worth checking out for sure for that reason. The next game is another really groundbreaking game, a game that I love. It's the second in the Legacy of Kain series, Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver. I played this game originally on the Dreamcast, where it obviously looked even better than this. But I did revisit the PS1 version later, because I was honestly shocked that it was even on the system, that it could even run on the system. And obviously, although not as graphically impressive as the Dreamcast, Soul Reaver is easily one of the best looking PS1 games ever. It's got massive gothic sort of inspired environments that are just absolutely amazing. They're dark and they're moody, they're full of really interesting architecture, and they're absolutely massive at times. There's some areas in the game which are just absolutely massive. Real nice texture work, great environmental lighting. There's a decent amount of fog in the game, obviously to hide some of the shortened draw distance in this version. But it's not as bad as, like, I don't know, an N64 game. But from the technical aspects of the game, the first real big one is there are no loading times in the game as you explore the sort of semi-open world, which to me is the most amazing technical feat of the game, for sure. And it's even more impressive when you understand that the game actually has two versions of the world at all times, that you can switch in between at certain times during the game to solve puzzles, or when you die, you actually switch to the, the spirit world or the physical world. And switching between the two is a pretty jaw-dropping effect for the time this game came out. The world warps around you, and there's even some enemies that are in one world and not the other. And some, puzzles, some environments in the game have you switching between the two to sort of navigate through the environment to get to, your goal. It's really good game design, and it's an amazing technical achievement for the PlayStation. There's a remake coming out pretty soon, but I mean, this original PlayStation version, for sure, it really pushed the hardware to new levels and did stuff that no other game had done at the time.
This plane, they become eaters of souls. Do not allow these spirits to re-inhabit their corpses.
Quake 2 released for the PlayStation. Yes, Quake 2, the famous Quake 2, the arena shooter. In 1999 by Hammerhead. And if you thought Alien Resurrection looked good, well, this part of the PC game is even better. Obviously, Quake 2 was originally released for the PC, and it was one of the early games that used PC 3D accelerator cards, graphic cards, and it was a flagship game for the PC sort of master race to exert their wills upon the console peasants like myself. But given those facts, the fact that the PlayStation version of Quake 2 is almost as close visually to the PC version is insane to me. This is one of those games that people did not think would be possible to port to such an inferior system compared to a top-of-the-line PC at the time, but they did it. It looks and runs stunningly. Obviously, it's not up to the fidelity of a top-of-the-line PC at the time. But on the PlayStation, like if you played this game back when it came out, it would have blown your mind for real. The biggest difference from the two versions is the smooth textures of the PC version are obviously more pixelated on the PlayStation, but not enough to hurt this version. There is some, differences in the geometries of the levels and stuff like that. They had to remake some stuff just to make it run on the PlayStation, but nothing that detracted from the game. It's got a super solid frame rate and really, really detailed graphics and character models. The levels are still huge with really varied textures and lighting effects. Characters and enemies are detailed way more than you would expect from a port of this type, and I honestly don't know how they managed the graphical magic that they did. They slightly modified some of the level's geometries, like I said before, on the PlayStation hardware. But on the other hand, they improved some things, like adding lens flares to some of the lighting in the game and some small tweaks like that. The color palette was even improved. The PlayStation version has a slightly more colorful browns than the browns in the PC version. Most things in this game are brown. And the greatest technical achievement is probably, it's got 4-player split screen with a multi-tap. 4 players can play couch co-op at the same time with almost zero slowdown, with no performance issues whatsoever. The game runs just as good as single player as it does in split screen, which is crazy. It is a crazy technical achievement that is super impressive. I can't get footage right now of 4 players playing because I don't have 4 friends to play with. I have 0. And that leads us into one of the greatest 3D JRPGs on the PlayStation. Well, it's a mix of 2D and 3D, to be honest. Which is, of course, undoubtedly the Squaresoft masterpiece, released in 2000, Final Fantasy IX. Of course, Final Fantasy VII and VIII were both no slouches in the graphically impressive department at the times they came out, but Final Fantasy IX is definitely where Squaresoft perfected their craft. It's got the pre-rendered 2D backgrounds and 3D models just like the other 2 Final Fantasies with fully 3D battles, but Final Fantasy IX definitely is the most polished in all the categories. The biggest jump up in Final Fantasy IX are the battle graphics, which jump back to 4 characters. From the 16-bit days, you had 4 characters on the screen. Final Fantasy VII and VIII only had 3 at a time, probably for technical reasons. But Final Fantasy IX jumped that back up to 4. And it's even more impressive, honestly, due to the 3D models of the characters, which are super detailed in and out of battle. They have so much personality and life in their animations, which is an aspect I don't think Squaresoft from the PlayStation days gets a lot of enough credit for. Especially the enemies and some bosses in the battles are animated just so well, with a lot of super tiny details that some people might not even notice to like their animations. Squaresoft was definitely the best in the business at the time. Magical effects too, Squaresoft has been the king of for so long that we all take it for granted, but Final Fantasy IX showcases the best magical and graphic effects out of, the Squaresoft repertoire too, especially in the summons, which obviously Squaresoft is known for in the PlayStation areas, the amazing summons. And it all runs super smoothly. There's only a couple points where, it slows down or there's any jitters or anything like that. And just like the 3D assets, the 2D backgrounds are super detailed and layered in a way that they're semi-interactive with the 3D models and really creates a sense of cohesiveness that other JRPGs at the time did not have. And it really blurs the lines between the 3D and the 2D assets. Like some of the games at the time, like Legend of Dragoon, like you can definitely tell it's a polygon character on top of just a flat image. Well, the 2D backgrounds of Final Fantasy IX are very layered and everything, so it definitely creates that mystique of a sort of connected graphical package. A lot of the charm of Final Fantasy IX are the lovable characters and the atmosphere, but graphically, it's absolutely one of the best examples of the level that graphics got by the end of the PlayStation 1's lifespan. And last but not least, we're going to close this list out with another 2D game. Yes, a 2D game. What? Okay, it's 2D, 3D again. But it's a 2D game that looks so good that you would never understand why the PS1 was considered a weak 2D system. It's up there as one of the best looking 2D JRPGs of all time, and it is Breath of Fire 4. And now honestly, the game isn't completely 2D. It's a combination of 3D polygons in the background and 2D sprites as the characters like Grandia. like the opposite of the Final Fantasy games. The backgrounds are all 3D, as well as there's certain boss battles that are also 3D, but clearly the sprites steal the show of the game here. The 3D work is okay. It's not the best, it's not the worst. Some of the models are very basic and rudimentary, and the texture work is just okay, but oh my gosh, that 2D art. And honestly, more of the game should have been the sprites, because just the art style and the quality of the pixel work is astounding. The characters have a ton of personality with their sprites / art style, and their animations really give the game a unique look. Where it really shines the most is obviously the battles. The player and the enemy sprites and the animations in the battles are like easily some of the best in the PlayStation. And they have more frames of animation than any other sprite-based RPG on the system, like Xenogears or Valkyrie Profile. The game makers touted that the game has over 3,000 frames of animation or something like that for character animation. But the game did have a smaller cast of characters, mainly because of that. Maybe they ran out of space with all those frames of character animations, so they had less sort of characters in the game, but I don't know. The graphics are super colorful, even though they're a little muted, sort of in comparison to Breath of Fire 3. But they're definitely better than Breath of Fire 3. And there's also a pretty good anime cutscene to start the game too. Gameplay, storyline-wise, Breath of Fire 4 is not the greatest in the world, but those beautiful, stunning sprites and animations easily make up one of the most graphically impressive PlayStation 1 games of all time. So guys, gals, non-binary pals, thank you for tuning in to another video. I'm gonna try to do more videos, believe it or not. There's more videos coming, I swear. So peace out, and let me know down below some of your most graphically impressive PlayStation games. I think we're gonna do the 16-bit era next. But the wizards at Insomniac Games yet made truly what might be the best looking platformer on the PlayStation, because there was a Wipeout 3 on the PlayStation. And it was a huge, in my opinion, huge step back from Excel. 1996 developed created a racing series with graphics that had never been matched before on a console system. But on the PlayStation, like if you played this game back when it came out, it would have blown your mind for real. And the greatest technical achievement is probably, it's got 4-player split screen with a multi-tap. 4 players can play couch co-op at the same time with almost zero slowdown, with no performance issues whatsoever. Now of 4 players playing, because I don't have 4 friends to play with. I have 0.
You have me! What am I to you, a rat?